After a decade of drought, a decent drenching has transformed Australia's bread bowl. But the good times for Australian agriculture are also a great new opportunity for one very unwelcome native insect.
We have declared war on locusts. This will be, on all the advice we've got, the worst plague that we've seen certainly since 1974.
For millions of years, the end of drought on this continent has heralded the arrival of vast swarms of locusts. In Western Queensland, which has its own species, the spur-throated locust, vast swarms are already making their way across prime grazing country. Authorities there have started spraying. But further south in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, where grains and other crops are cultivated, a more common species, Australian plague locusts, have started hatching in thousands of sites, and farmers are bracing for devastation. Getting on top of the problem is a big job for people like these, here at the Regional Locust Management Centre at Mildura, in the far northwest of Victoria.
In my experience, I haven't encountered anything so widespread before, and I think when you look at the egg bed maps, there are certainly, they're starting to hatch in those particular areas, and it is starting to come to fruition, so that when we get all the reports in from the public through the hotline, they're mapped so we can identify the locations. We then follow up the locations and do some inspections of those sites.
State governments have purchased huge quantities of insecticides ahead of a planned mass spraying campaign. But they're facing criticism from farmers for waiting for all of the insects to hatch before they begin, and from some environmentalists for deciding to spray at all. Authorities say they're only using the sorts of agricultural chemicals already used by farmers anyway.
The buffer zones that we apply will ensure that we have adequate distance between any sensitive areas such as waterways, beehive sites, some of those sort of areas that are sensitive, or any environmentally sensitive area.
But no amount of caution can convince Victorian sheep farmer Eris O'Brien. He grew up on the land and worked for years as an environmental consultant.
In the last 10 years, obviously, we've had a lot of droughts, and I've built up a pasture base that has maintained the productivity for grazing. This has included, no chemical use, aiming at increasing beneficial insects and rotational grazing.
While Mr O'Brien says farmers should have the right to use sprays to protect their crops from locusts, the government campaign to spray reserves, roadsides and other public land is misguided.
I mean, there'll be farms around where there isn't a big risk to wildlife and that the farmers will choose to use sprays and it won't be a big issue. But this focus on spraying roadsides, on spraying reserves, on spraying native vegetation on farms with pesticides will have a big impact. The other point is that Australian marsupials, they're found are actually 10 times more susceptible than the rodents that they tested these pesticides on. We've just got to do a bit of a hunt around here.
Eris O'Brien is backed up in his campaign by the environmental lobby, which says carnivorous marsupials like the fat-tailed dunnet will be killed in big numbers by the government's spraying campaigns.
He's going to be pretty spooked by the light in the sun.
He says a mass migration of locusts is a natural occurrence, and that for scores of animal species like these apostle birds, the locusts will be an important source of protein to help numbers recover after years of drought. And then there's the other insects that will die as a result of the spraying.
Throughout history, if you look into the history of it, a lot of the plagues in the past have actually been ended through natural parasites. Now, the spraying on the reserved land will kill the natural parasites, so in effect they could actually make the plague go on for longer. Before pesticides were invented, there were farmers in the Wimmera who effectively controlled locusts by mechanical control using harrows running over the bands. When the locusts are in a band, there's no reason why you can't squash them as well as you can spray them. Because they've been so focused on eliminating locusts, eliminating the process, they've failed to focus on any repellent options because that goes against the policy. And yet it's the best option for protecting the high value crops.
He's also promoting the term migration as opposed to plague. After all, locusts are an indigenous species with their own part to play in the ecosystem. But in a world where food production is becoming increasingly crucial, there appears to be no place for the locust, which is branded by farmers and governments alike as an unnecessary and altogether unwelcome pest.